Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a book review and discussion for Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. The way that I structure my book reviews is I discuss the plot of the book, the things that I liked, the things that I didn't like, and then I give the book an overall rating. So if you are interested in skipping to any one of those particular sections, I will put timestamps down in the description box below. Also, if you have not yet checked out my review of Dune, I will link that down in the description box below, as well as in the cards if you're interested in checking that out first, as this is a sequel to that book. Diving into the plot of Dune Messiah, this is the second book in Frank Herbert's Dune series, and it takes place 12 years after the initial events of Dune, and we are following Paul Atreides, who is now Emperor of the known universe. In this book, Paul struggles with the consequences of his rise to power, and there are a lot of people that do not want him in such a position and are conspiring to overthrow him or find a way to outmaneuver the Atreides line. And this includes influences from the Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, the Tleilaxu, even his own wife Irulan, who is only a wife on paper and not really in relationship status. Paul also faces a lot of conflicts regarding the jihad that is being carried out in his name, as he does not agree with the death, chaos, and violence that is being inflicted under his name, as he has been elevated to a messianic figure in a lot of the Fremen sects. Additionally, Paul's ability to have prescience, to see in the future, is also weighing heavily on him, as he only sees a pathway of further war and destruction. Paul, unfortunately, has been placed into a position that he didn't necessarily want, that had been orchestrated centuries and centuries by outside political parties, and he has to navigate within this set path to do the best he can for everybody, even though he doesn't want that responsibility or the title of emperor. Additionally, we also have his relationship with Chani and Irulan. So Irulan is his wife that he married for political reasons, but he has no relationship with her really at all. Like, she is just there as a political statement. He has no physical relationship with her. He barely talks to her. And then he has Chani, who is the Fremen, and that is the love of his life. And Chani wants children, but unfortunately has not been able to have them. And what we learn early on in the book is that Irulan has been giving Chani a contraceptive in her food for years and years and years, and that's why they have not been able to have a child. But the Bene Gesserit absolutely do not want a child of Chani and Paul on the throne. They want a more pure line from Irulan and Paul to be his successor. Paul doesn't want this because, number one, he doesn't love Irulan, but number two, he feels like having a child with her would just make it a target or a pawn to be used and played with by the Bene Gesserit and the other political / religious fractions in this world. We also have Alia, Paul's sister, as a prominent character in this book. She is now, I believe, 16 years old. As we know, in Dune, Paul was about 15 or 16 when that story takes place, and his mother Jessica was pregnant. So now we have Alia, and Alia is young, but she is imbued with all the memories of her mother due to what happened when Jessica was pregnant, and we learn about that in Dune. And she is filled with all of this knowledge from previous generations of Bene Gesserit and her mother. So in a sense, she is not really a child. She is wise beyond her years, but then there is a part of her that is still a youth. And she has a lot of influence, a lot of sway in this world. She is very much respected and seen kind of like a prophetess or a priestess in this world, and people come to her at the temple where she prophesies for them and comforts them and gives them advice. And she is also seen somewhat as a political / religious figure. If you are enjoying this video, please consider hitting that subscribe button, as well as giving this video a like to throw my channel a little love and support. Also, I am the author of the sci-fi mystery book Aftermath, which currently has a 4.5 rating on Goodreads. I would love for y'all to take a second and check it out and see if it is a book that speaks to you and that you might be interested in reading. I would really appreciate it. Going on into the things that I like about this book is definitely not as epic as Dune, but then again, it doesn't have to be, because in Dune, we are starting from the beginning. We are learning about this universe, this world that Frank Herbert created. We are learning about how it functions, the history and uses of melange, all of that. This book focuses way more on the internal struggles of Paul, his family, as well as the political machinations of this world, which were always at play, but we continue to see how they are trying to force their hand in things and control Paul, and how he is pushing back and how that is tearing him apart to be both a political figure and a religious figure to some people, as well as just a man. I found this book because of it to be a bit sad, and not the way that you think. So Paul has so much heaviness on him, so much pressure, and he is a bit melancholy. I even said to my husband he's a bit emo, because he is always brooding about the future and what's going to happen, and trying to make all these tough decisions, because literally the lives of billions are in his hands. And I can't imagine the stress of that responsibility, so it makes sense that he would be dark and brooding for most of this book. I also liked Alia's character. I feel like she added a bit of a fresh voice to the story, and based on what happened during her gestation when she was still a baby growing inside of Jessica, we know that she is different, and we see how her existence, which wasn't even seen by the Bene Gesserit, wasn't planned, wasn't something that they could account for, we see how her presence kind of threw a wrench into everything. We also see that the planet of Arrakis has changed. So Paul brought different technologies to help, I guess, the planet sustain water. And at first I was like, that made me a little bit sad, because, you know, Dune had its own specific ecosystem, and the desert was part of that. But then at times the Fremen really struggled with getting water and moisture and all of that. So I'm glad that he attempted to introduce water onto this planet to help them, but that is going to change a lot of the Fremen culture, because a lot of the Fremen culture was based around their lack of water. So it just made me a little sad, thinking that the new generations of Fremen might be a little bit different from the older generations due to this new ecosystem that Paul is introducing. But I see why he did it. I see the good in it, but I also am a little sad for it. I also really like the themes that Frank Herbert explored in this book, especially the themes around power and influence. We see Paul struggling with the consequences of his rise to power and the responsibilities that come with it. His position as a messianic figure has led to this religious war that is being spread across the universe, and a lot of people are dying and killing in his name, and he has absolutely no control over it. I also like how Frank Herbert touched on, I guess, law versus morality, or how human idealism kind of revolves around those two things, because Paul was trying to do good, trying to create good, and even Chani, his wife, said at one time that your laws are just. He seeks to create a better future, not only for the people on Arrakis, but the Empire in general, but we see how that has a cost to it, as people are constantly fighting and betraying him. While I can appreciate Paul's idealism in trying to make the world a better place, Frank Herbert does a good job of showing that in reality, this can be very messy and hard to control at times. I also felt really bad for Paul a lot of the time, because Frank Herbert touches on what it means to be a leader and what it means to sacrifice in order for your vision to become fulfilled. For example, Paul was forced into this position. He didn't want to marry Irulan. He did not want to live a life where he had all of these responsibilities. He probably would have just been happy living in the desert with Chani, but unfortunately that is not able to happen. So he had to sacrifice a lot of what he wanted for his life in order for everything to come to fruition in the best possible outcome. As for the things I didn't like so much, I'm really not a huge fan of the prophecy trope, and that is heavy in the Dune series, because I feel like it's kind of makes it so that if you're able to see every single possible future, then it's not prophetic, because you can just follow one of those paths and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, there are times where Paul is not able to see all outcomes, which does add a little bit of ambiguity to it. I feel like if everything is set in stone and it's going to happen regardless, then it kind of discounts the idea of free will. I also don't like how Frank Herbert wrote the vision scenes or the prophecy scenes, and I never liked that in the original book either, because I thought that it ate up way too much page time. It was too surreal, too ambiguous, and I also felt like Frank Herbert, I don't know, was on an acid trip when he was writing these scenes, because they were very, very abstract. They made absolutely no sense, and I just didn't enjoy reading them at all. Regardless, the prophetic trope is just one that I personally don't like, and that may be utterly subjective. I also wasn't a whole fan of the jihad concept, because it wasn't explained well. So the Fremen were oppressed for a long time. Their planet was literally exploited for the spice, and without the spice, a lot of the things that they are able to do in this world, they wouldn't be able to do, such as literally interstellar travel. So Arrakis was being exploited so much for this resource, so it makes sense that the Fremen would be angry and want retribution. But for them to go on this massive killing spree across the whole universe, like, how angry are you at these people? And I have to stop and step back. I get it if you're angry at like the Harkonnens or those who were directly involved in mining the spice, but it's almost like these people are mad at even those who take the spice or even those who attempt to use it in order to have interstellar travel. Like anybody who uses the spice, I feel like they are attacking. But at that point, the spice is ingrained in the function of this entire universe, interplanetary universe. And you kind of have to, I feel like, step back and accept that for generations you were being exploited, but that violence specifically has stopped. And yes, they're using spice from your world, but at this point, just let them, as long as you are compensated and treated well for what you are giving to the universe. So I feel like the reason why they were doing the jihad was a little bit unclear, unless it's something that was maybe more explained in Dune that I just forgot about or missed when I was reading. I also felt like this book was very Paul-centric, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but in Dune, we get a lot of Lady Jessica's character, we get a lot more of Chani's character, and in this book, that wasn't the case. Chani really had no place in this book. She was just a support for Paul, and really just wasn't even part of the story hardly. Lady Jessica wasn't part of the story at all. At all. She wasn't even in this book. I also thought there was going to be more to Irulan's plot line. So initially she was conspiring against Paul. She didn't want Chani to get pregnant, so she was giving Chani the contraceptive. But then we also learned that she wants to have Paul's baby, which just makes sense. And I felt bad for Irulan because Irulan, I mean, if I was her, I would be angry and resentful as well. Her life was literally stripped from her. She was forced to marry a man who showed her no love, warmth, or comfort, and then did not deny being a mother. Like, if I was her, I would be seething and bitter, and I completely get why she was attempting to conspire against Paul. At the beginning of the book, it seems that Irulan is going to be a part of these conspiracies against Paul, but then it kind of just fizzles out, and by the end of the book, she's not even a part of it. Now I'm going to go on to some spoilery aspects of the book, just kind of a discussion, some things that I really didn't understand or didn't really like so much. So then we have Irulan, like I was talking about, and she really, really wanted children. And Paul even says to the Bene Gesserit, look, we can do artificial insemination. You can have, my genetics, and you can make a baby like that with Irulan being the mother, and she would have her baby. And essentially that child would be ruled by the Bene Gesserit. And I guess that never happens because we don't hear anything else about it after Paul offers this to them. At the end of the book, we do learn that Chani does get pregnant with twins, and she dies in childbirth, birthing the twins. And Paul didn't know it was going to be twins. He only thought it was going to be a daughter. And then it makes it sound like Irulan steps in and takes the place of mothering these children and finds fulfillment of that. It's very loosely referenced to at the end of the book that that's what happens. So I'm glad Irulan got some sort of satisfaction in her role as a mother, because like I said, her initial part of the plot seemed like she was going to be conspiring against Paul, and then just nothing happened. And then we have Duncan Idaho. So all of us know that Duncan Idaho died in Dune. And the Tleilaxu have created a way to reanimate dead flesh. And they do this with Duncan Idaho. They bring him back. And I wasn't a huge fan of that. But in the end, I understand why they did it. And Duncan Idaho becomes a love interest for Alia, which is just really weird for me. Number one, he's a reanimated corpse. Number two, he's a lot older than Alia. Number three, Alia's a teenager, like biologically a teenager. So the whole thing was just weird and a bit icky for me. I didn't like it. So I understand, I think, why Frank Herbert made Duncan Idaho a Gola. Number one, when Chani dies in childbirth, the Tleilaxu offer Paul to make Chani a Gola. But if they do that, then he will be forever indebted to them, and they will use and exploit this indebtedness to make him do what they want. And Chani was the love of Paul's life. His love for her was like so incredibly strong. He was very tempted to take the Tleilaxu up on this offer, But then again, if he did, he would just be another pawn being played by another group. And Paul was just over it. He was done with it. So he ends up denying the offer, killing the Tleilaxu, and Chani gets buried, which I think was definitely 100% the right choice to make. So at the end of the book, where that offer was made to Paul wouldn't have made much sense if we didn't understand what a Gola was to begin with. All in all, I'm glad that I read Dune Messiah. Like I said earlier, it definitely isn't as epic as the original book, but it didn't need to be. It was just a continuation of the story, and I've heard that it is a bridge between Dune and Children of Dune, so I'm actually interested to see if that is the case and how Children of Dune, the third book, kind of continues on with the story. I think one of the main themes that Frank Herbert was trying to communicate in this series is don't make people gods. Only God is God. And when you make people gods, devastation can follow. And I think that personally for me is a theme that speaks to me and I wholeheartedly agree with. I'm going to give Dune a 3 out of 5. Frank Herbert writes a lot of philosophical science fiction, and I was actually talking to my husband about this, and I'm like, I don't even know if I even consider this science fiction to a certain extent. This has a lot of fantasy elements in it. Yes, they talk about potential genetic engineering and all of that, but if you look at how this world functions, it functions with prophecies, with the Bene Gesserit literally being called witches. Paul has this ability to see into the future. You ingest a spice that kind of opens up your mind, so who knows what that can be. And we also have just a lack of hard sci-fi in this series. So I think it is a fantasy sci-fi more than your hard sci-fi. Regardless, I am going to continue the series and read Children of Dune. Alright you guys, that is my review of Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. Let me know in the comments if you read this book and what you thought of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video soon. Goodbye!